Hey, what's up, Star Wars fans? Thank y'all so much for clicking on today's video. For the second video in a row, we are going to be making another skeleton crew character, and today that is SM-33. So I hope you guys learn a little something from the tutorial, and I hope you enjoy the video.
Can't say I remember no at-atting.
Alright, so as always, we have to start off by eliminating the layer lines, and as you can see, this helmet does have a good bit of texture on it, but it is mostly smooth. So in the interest of time, we're going to use the Ryobi mouse sander. You don't want to sand away all the texture on the helmet, so make sure to keep the sander moving and not staying over one area too long. The top of the helmet has these really big grooves from the 3D printer, so we got to make sure to take extra care there. But before we do that, we're going to just normally sand like we typically would. And then parts the sander couldn't get, we're going to break out just regular old sheets of sandpaper and hit those by hand. I didn't film it, but we're going to be using more than just one grit of sandpaper. You want to start somewhere between 80 and 120 and then work your way all the way up to somewhere between 220 and 400. I think I had a little bit of 320 just kind of hanging around, so that's what I used here. After the initial round of sanding, we're going to go back and hit those problem areas like I mentioned earlier. So specifically the big round grooves on top of the helmet. We're just going to use a little bit of Bondo and apply that with your finger and let it sit for about an hour. And after waiting, you can go back with 220 grit sandpaper and just sand all that Bondo down. And you would have done a nice little bit of work to the top of that helmet. I like to use a Rust-Oleum automotive primer for all of my projects. It's kind of a good middle ground. It's something that's not too cheap, but something that's not overly expensive either. I think it's about $7 a can. So I like to start off with a light coat, which you see me doing here, and then waiting, about 5 minutes, and then doing a heavier coat, and then waiting about 30 minutes. And doing a second heavier coat. Because we put such heavy coats onto the project, you really want to make sure you give this an ample amount of time to dry. I like waiting 2 days, but after about a day is when my impatience really starts to get to me. You just kind of want to just be patient. Try to be patient. But we're essentially just doing the same exact steps we did last time here. We're starting a little bit higher this time, about 180 to 220, and then eventually going to work our way all the way up to 320 or 400. And after all that's done, if you see any areas that still need a little bit more help, you can go back in with the Bondo and just kind of reapply to those areas, wait an hour again, and then sand that down. So now we're going to apply our last coats of primer. We're going to do kind of like we did earlier, but we're not going to do the light coat. We're just going to do a heavy coat. Give it about 30 minutes to dry and cure, and then we're going to do one more heavy coat, and you should be good to go after that. And the last step of getting your print ready for paint is wet sanding. So we're just going to wet sand here with 400 grit sandpaper. This just really gives your piece a smooth finish, a glass-like finish, and it just makes it look really good when you apply the paint. So a little tip that I wasn't aware about until semi-recently, when you're going to UCA glue or Gorilla Glue, just dab a little bit of water on the surface that you want to glue together, and that water just kind of helps it bind together faster than it typically would. So I'm going to glue together the helmet here and that little mouthpiece in the bottom right hand corner. Alright, quick PSA from me before we get to the painting here. Don't do what I'm about to do. I really laid the paint on thick and quick. Don't do that. I know better than that. I don't know why I did that. But light coats. Always use light coats when painting. So this will all eventually be painted in silver for like chipping and all that good weathering stuff. But Any good silver starts with a glossy black base coat, so that's what we are doing here. I can't talk right now, but like I said, we're doing very heavy coats improperly, and I am going to get some runs at off camera. I am going to have to go sand out, so that's cool. But right now, everything's just getting a glossy black base coat. The only two pieces of the entire file that are black are these two little neck pieces, so they're going to get a quick black base coat, and they're going to stay this way for the rest of time. Once that gloss black is no longer tacky, we're going to be using a Rust-Oleum metallic finish aluminum over the top of that black. Now this aluminum color is even, what's the right way to put this? It's more runny than the black is, so we want to be especially sure this time around that we only do light coats, but I also don't want this to be like a super bright aluminum silver color, so we'll probably only do 2 light coats and not necessarily keep that black shining through, just not have it super shiny and reflective. And now for the fun part, that is masking away sections of the helmet that I want to stay silver. I just use any ordinary liquid latex that I think I found this one at Walmart or maybe Amazon. And I have just a ton of reference pictures on my phone. You can see me looking at right there. And I just have a ton of pictures of every angle, every side of the helmet. And I try to match it as best as I can. Sometimes you kind of have to take your own liberties, but just kind of have fun with it. And, you know, if you want to create your own thing, create your own thing. The paint we're going to be using is this Rust-Oleum, it's called Phantom Gray. I know you can't see it very well there, but it's Phantom Gray. And we're going to apply this to everywhere that needs it, which is the helmet and the torso part that I did not get any video of. I definitely went with a lighter color than I needed to on the paint, but I did that for a reason, as I am going to weather the shit out of this after it's all dry. But first, it's time for the funnest part of this entire project, and that is removing the liquid latex. And then you don't really need to at this point, but I was starting to get the itch of seeing how the helmet looked with some more pieces glued on. So I went ahead and glued on the ear caps, one of the eyes, and the little thingies at the top of the helmet. Alright, so we're finally in the home stretch and we are to weathering. I'm mixing the black wash right now, but I did want to say real quick before I start talking about that I did go over the 2 pieces you see with a dark gray wash. You can see the little bottle right there. And I kind of did this just to kind of darken it up ever so slightly, even though the black wash is what's really going to do that. But more than anything, I probably did that gray wash just to kind of give the pieces like some definition, I guess, if you want to call it that. So this is a pretty easy process. I'm using, I would say, a medium-sized chip brush to just kind of go and apply the wash to basically everything. And then, you know, in the time that you're applying it, the spots that you started with are not drying, but, you know, kind of getting set a little bit. So when you go and just give it a kind of nice, worn look. You could do this pretty much as many times as you like, knowing that this was just the start of my weathering. I think I did it 2 or 3 times. Another thing you could do is, rather than wiping away using the paper towel, you can kind of blot at the piece, or, you know, like tap the paper towel, and with the the textures of the paper towel, it'll kind of leave behind the paint in this almost textured look, which depending on what you're going for, can also leave a very worn and naturally worn look to your piece as well. Apologies that this clip is out of focus, but what I'm doing here is I'm applying a bit of a green color that I mixed, because if you look at pictures of SM-33 from cons or the premiere or other things like that, he has a bit of a moldish, kind of mildewish look to him. So I mixed up this little green color, I'm applying it with a brush, and then I'm using the same chip brush that I used to weather the rest of him with, to just kind of stipple it a little bit, and then I'm going in with a paper towel and removing a little bit of it, but keeping a good bit of it. I really wish this part wasn't so out of focus. And the final step of the weathering is using my airbrush, and I mixed what I like to call some dirty water into my airbrush, and I'm just kind of strategically going around and applying it in certain areas, using the chip brush to kind of create a little bit of a stipple effect, and then taking it off a little bit. And then in other areas, I just go around with the brush, with the airbrush, and apply it to like cracks or cuts or scars or that kind of thing, and just leaving it, kind of making a darker area in general.